They mocked the black woman in first class until the pilot announced she was his wife. She stepped into the aircraft with a deep breath, carefully placing her carry-on in the overhead bin above her. First class seat. The disapproving stares hit instantly a poised black woman traveling alone, dressed in a sleek, charcoal grey pantsuit and carrying herself with quiet confidence. Each whispered remark from the passengers around her felt like shards of glass. She must be in the wrong seat. There's no way she can afford first class by herself. Unbeknownst to them, this woman was exactly where she belonged. No one realized that at cruising altitude, a single announcement from the flight deck would expose every hateful assumption and change the entire flight's atmosphere. Long before she stepped onto that Delta Airlines Boeing 737, Nia Johnson learned to hold her head high no matter what came her way. Growing up in southwest Atlanta, in a neighborhood often overlooked by city planners and overshadowed by the bustle of downtown, she embraced resilience, the way most children her age embraced play. She was no stranger to cracked sidewalks, shuttered storefronts, and limited opportunities. Instead of allowing those hardships to define her, she consumed them like fuel for an engine that would eventually roar her toward a future she could only imagine at the time. Her father, Henry Johnson, owned a modest auto repair shop near College Park. He'd risen every morning before the sun, sometimes working 12-hour days, to provide for his wife and daughter. Nia spent many weekends in that grease-scented garage, handing him wrenches, listening to the hum of engines, and learning an odd but valuable lesson: even a broken machine could roar back to life with the right care. When she was only 10, her father taught her to recognize every bolt and gear in a car's engine. When you understand how something works, he would say, you can find a solution even if it's not obvious. She carried that philosophy into every aspect of her life. Her mother, Teresa Johnson, was an elementary school teacher who believed wholeheartedly that education was a door to unimaginable possibilities. She drilled into Nia the significance of excelling academically. While Nia's friends spent after-school hours at the mall or hanging out on street corners, Nia hunkered down with her mother for algebra quizzes, reading comprehension exercises, and discussions about the civil rights movement. Teresa saw in Nia a spark of greatness from a tender age, and she refused to let that spark go untended. Each time Nia aced a test, they'd celebrate with a trip to the local library, an odd form of celebration in most eyes, but to them it was everything. They'd load up on books about science, history, finance, and even business strategy. By her teenage years, Nia had developed a thirst for knowledge that seemed insatiable. She was drawn to the intersection of math and real-world applications, particularly in finance. She'd watch her father struggle with the bookkeeping for his garage, then tinker with the numbers on a battered old laptop to figure out how to reduce overhead. This was real-world problem-solving, tangible and immediate. Her father was amazed when she managed to help him cut costs just by reorganizing inventory and automating certain supply orders. He marveled at how quickly she caught on. At the age of 16, she was basically her father's unofficial business advisor. Yet, for all her abilities, Nia was also acutely aware of prejudice. One day, during a high school math competition, she outscored every other participant, including those from wealthier school districts. Instead of praise, she was confronted by suspicious glances and an accusation of cheating. Though school administrators eventually retracted their claims, the experience scarred her. Still, it made her mother's lessons resonate even more. Teresa told her, "Don't let ignorant people shrink you. You belong in every room you walk into. Remember that." Those words became a mantra. The seeds of her unwavering confidence were planted in those early years, seeds that would burst into full bloom when she entered adulthood. Every time someone assumed she couldn't possibly be the star pupil or the top intern, it only solidified her resolve. Her father's day-to-day lessons in mechanical resilience, combined with her mother's unwavering belief in the power of education, forged a deep well of fortitude within her. She would need every ounce of that resilience on a fateful day, thousands of feet above the ground, when prejudice tried to ground her once more. When it came time to apply to colleges, Nia's record was spectacular: stellar grades, glowing letters of recommendation, and a proven aptitude for leadership. She secured admission to Clark Atlanta University with a partial scholarship, determined to ease the financial burden on her parents. There, she chose to major in business administration with a focus on finance, a field that felt like a natural extension of her talents. College introduced her to a larger world, diverse peers, professors with expertise spanning the globe, and dialogues about social justice that deepened her passion for equality. She thrived in that environment. Alongside her rigorous coursework, she became involved in student government, joining committees that focused on equity and inclusion. The spark for social advocacy, ignited in her teen years, burned brighter with each new encounter on campus. Her nights, however, were long and demanding. Working two part-time jobs, one in the university's administrative office and another tutoring high school students, made for a hefty workload. Yet, she attacked her responsibilities with the same determination that guided her when she was just a young girl learning to fix cars. Each paycheck helped pay for textbooks, groceries, and a small fraction of tuition left uncovered by her scholarship. She lived by a mantra of no wasted moments. After finishing her shift, she'd stay up until 2 a.m. over financial models or writing research papers on corporate case studies. By the time she graduated, summa cum laude, Nia had already built a small network of mentors and advisors, people who recognized that she was more than a diligent student. She was a visionary in the making. One of her professors, a former Wall Street analyst, personally referred her to a boutique financial advisory firm in Atlanta. That first job as a junior consultant became the launching pad for a future that would exceed even her own lofty ambitions. Transitioning from academia to a high-stakes corporate environment required Nia to adapt her skill set. At the boutique advisory firm, she was assigned to analyze stock portfolios, help restructure small businesses, and compile financial strategies for regional corporations. The learning curve was steep, but Nia relished the challenge. She devoured annual reports with the same zeal she once gave to library books in her youth. Even as a junior team member, she exhibited a knack for spotting inefficiencies and identifying growth opportunities that more seasoned professionals overlooked. However, not everyone welcomed her contributions. Certain colleagues doubted her capabilities because of her youth, her background, and her race. Some clients seemed visibly surprised when the brilliant analyst they'd heard about turned out to be a petite black woman in her early 20s. There were subtle comments, patronizing remarks about her potential, and whispered questions about whether she had the experience to guide major financial decisions. Each time she encountered these microaggressions, she channeled her father's mechanical ethos. If a system was broken, you find a way to fix it. In her case, that meant proving her worth through results so undeniable that prejudice had no place to hide. Her tenacity paid off. Within 3 years, she moved to a nationally recognized consulting firm, doubling her salary and broadening her scope of work. She now advised mid-market companies on how to optimize their capital structure and forecast long-term sustainability. She impressed CEOs and CFOs alike, forging an indomitable reputation. Nia Johnson was the consultant who came in, studied every detail, and left businesses stronger than ever. Her phone buzzed with offers from prospective clients who wanted her strategic mind dissecting their finances. Yet, with greater success came a more frenetic schedule. She traveled so frequently that she started to feel more at home in the corridors of Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport than in her own condo. She'd land in Chicago for 2 days, return to Atlanta for a night, then jet off to New York for a meeting the next morning. Her frequent flyer miles soared, and so did her status with Delta Airlines. At times, it felt exhilarating being in the thick of corporate negotiations, meeting new people, seeing different cities. Other times, it wore her down, leaving her longing for something more grounding, something more personal. That was when life took a turn she never expected, in the shape of a Delta pilot who exuded calmness, with the same effortless grace that Nia exuded confidence. One early Monday, Nia was set to fly to Chicago for a high-stakes presentation that could cement a multi-million-dollar deal. She was, as usual, laser-focused on her laptop while waiting at gate 28 for boarding to commence. Rumors of a mechanical delay began circulating among restless passengers. Aggravated travelers shuffled about, checking their phones for updates, while Nia tried to remain calm. Time was money, especially for the client who'd scheduled an entire day around her presentation. Then Marcus Rodriguez appeared. He was a first officer at the time, not yet a captain, wearing the crisp Delta uniform that many found immediately reassuring. The gate staff asked him to explain the delay, hoping his authoritative presence might soothe the crowd. Marcus stepped forward with an air of self-assurance that was neither forced nor overbearing. He calmly explained that an unexpected mechanical issue required further inspection. "We want to ensure your safety," he said in a resonant voice that seemed to command attention without demanding it. "It might take an hour, but trust us, it's better to be safe on the ground than risk anything in the air." As he spoke, Nia noticed a certain earnestness. She found herself disarmed by his demeanor, her usual irritability at travel hiccups replaced by curiosity. He seemed genuinely concerned for the passenger's well-being, not merely reciting a script. When the flight finally boarded, Nia found herself in a seat near the front. Marcus passed through the cabin to help flight attendants manage some overhead bin shuffle. Their eyes met, and he offered a polite, "I'm sorry for the inconvenience. We'll get you there safely as soon as possible." Something in his tone felt personal, like he saw her stress and empathized with it. Later that day, after the flight landed safely in Chicago, Nia received a LinkedIn message from Marcus. He had recognized her name from the passenger manifest, one of the perks or curiosities of the flight deck, apparently. She hesitated, but decided to accept the connection. What followed were polite exchanges about traveling for business, recommended restaurants in various cities, and the pressures of maintaining relationships while constantly on the move. Over weeks, those casual chats turned into deeper conversations about family, personal goals, and beliefs. In a swirl of airport lounges, coffee breaks, and scattered off-duty hours, they discovered a mutual respect that soon blossomed into genuine affection. Marcus, Nia learned, was driven not just by the thrill of flying, but by the responsibility of caring for countless souls. Each time he stepped into the cockpit. He'd grown up in a humble neighborhood in Miami, raised by a single mother who juggled multiple jobs. His dream of becoming a pilot started as a childhood fascination with airplanes soaring overhead. Through scholarships, grit, and unwavering dedication, he had climbed the ranks to first officer. Each rung of the ladder reminded him of the sacrifices that shaped him, much like Nia's journey had shaped her. What truly bonded them was a shared commitment to excellence and an unspoken understanding that, as people of color in high-pressure fields, they were constantly holding themselves to the highest standard. They clicked because they had both mastered the delicate dance of staying true to themselves while excelling in spheres where many believed they didn't belong. Their relationship deepened as Marcus was promoted to captain. He moved from the right seat of the cockpit to the left, signifying command. The day he donned his newly minted captain's stripes was also the day he surprised Nia with a bouquet of her favorite flowers, lilies and white roses, at the airport arrivals area. The beaming pride on his face reminded Nia of her own father's grin whenever he learned she'd accomplished something remarkable. As Captain Rodriguez, Marcus now had a far more hectic schedule. International routes, nights spent in different time zones, and unexpected last-minute schedule swaps became the norm. Nia's own consultancy projects were equally time-consuming. Some weeks, they found themselves on opposite sides of the globe, connecting only via sporadic texts and short video calls. Yet, they were determined to make it work, fueled by a genuine partnership that celebrated one another's victories. When they finally did align their schedules, meeting at a layover city or sharing an evening in Atlanta, it felt magical. Stolen weekends in Savannah, late dinners in Chicago's bustling downtown, occasional quiet nights in Nia's condo where they cooked a meal together, discussing everything from corporate contracts to cockpit protocols. Each moment, no matter how brief, felt earned through mutual sacrifice. Marcus proposed on a weekend getaway to the Georgia coast. They'd strolled along the beach under a sunset that painted the sky pink and orange. Nia, tired but happy, kicked off her shoes to feel the wet sand beneath her toes. Marcus knelt, producing a ring from his pocket, a modest solitaire diamond that he said represented a future of boundless possibilities. Overcome with emotion, Nia accepted without hesitation. Their wedding was a private affair, just immediate family and a few close friends, though it felt grand to them. The union of two dedicated souls who had risen above so many odds was, in itself, a celebration larger than any venue could contain. Married life was an ongoing balancing act. Nia and Marcus both had unpredictable work schedules, but they remained each other's constant source of encouragement. A year into their marriage, Nia secured a contract with a burgeoning tech startup in Los Angeles, a deal that could set new financial precedents for her firm. She was to fly out of Atlanta on a certain Monday morning, finalize negotiations, and ideally have dinner with her newly minted clients by early evening. Armed with her platinum medallion status on Delta, she managed to secure a first-class seat on Flight 1123 to LAX. As she hurried through Hartsfield-Jackson's corridors, she texted Marcus to see if he was in town. He had mentioned an international route to Honolulu, but the airline's scheduling system was fickle. She got no response. Most likely he was in a briefing or mid-flight. Shrugging it off, she set her sights on the gate, determined to use her flight time to refine her pitch deck. Little did she know that behind the scenes, the airline had reassigned Marcus to the Atlanta-LAX route at the last minute. He was, in fact, preparing to pilot Flight 1123. Neither had discovered the coincidence before boarding started. Fate had set the stage for an encounter that would test Nia's composure like never before. The moment Nia entered the first-class cabin, something felt off. She'd boarded with other premium passengers, placing her carry-on in the overhead bin above seat 2A. A couple of travelers, presumably used to a rather homogeneous first-class experience, threw her curious looks. One flight attendant, Deborah, paused briefly while scanning Nia's boarding pass, eyebrows arching as though Nia might have boarded by mistake. Nevertheless, Deborah mustered a standard, if lukewarm, greeting. In the seat next to Nia sat an older woman with meticulously styled blonde hair. Next to her, though in the row behind, seat 3B was an equally well-dressed older man who seemed intent on making eye contact with Nia, but not in a friendly way. Across the aisle, another passenger, a middle-aged man named Ray Cunningham, sat fidgeting with his phone, occasionally sneering in Nia's direction as if something about her presence annoyed him. Sinking into her seat, Nia opened her laptop, trying to ignore the atmosphere. A short while later, Deborah wheeled a beverage cart down the aisle for pre-flight drinks. She offered Nia a choice of coffee, juice, or champagne. Nia opted for orange juice, figuring she'd remain sharp for her eventual meeting in La. As Deborah poured the drink, the older couple exchanged whispers Nia could half hear. "Never seen her before in this cabin," the woman remarked, voice dripping with derision. The man nodded. "Yes, indeed. Looks out of place." Nia felt the old, familiar sensation, anger, sadness, and the urge to prove herself all at once. She reminded herself that she'd worked hard to be here. She owed no one an explanation. Instead of engaging, she sipped her juice and stared at her laptop screen, eyes scanning the lines of revenue forecasts for the tech startup. High in the cockpit, Captain Marcus Rodriguez ran through the pre-flight checklist with his first officer. The seatbelt sign, cabin pressure reading, fuel check, weather updates, everything was routine. Still, he felt a stirring in his gut, a sense that the day held something unexpected. He chalked it up to habit. Every flight carried its own complexities. He had no clue his wife was seated just a few yards away, separated by a cabin door and a swirl of prejudice-laced whispers. He pushed out a final communication to ground control, verifying the flight path. If all went well, they would cruise at 37,000 feet and land at LAX a little after midday Pacific time. Satisfied, Marcus keyed the intercom to deliver a greeting. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Captain Rodriguez. Welcome aboard Delta Flight 1123 with non-stop service to Los Angeles. We expect a flight time of about 4 hours and 30 minutes. Nia's eyes snapped up from her laptop. Recognition crashed into her like a wave. Marcus? He was the captain? She felt a surge of warmth and excitement. It was rare they ended up on the same flight, let alone with him as pilot. Maybe it was a scheduling surprise. She looked around, half wondering if the flight attendants knew. She considered telling Deborah or the other flight attendant, Amanda, but decided to keep quiet. Marcus always strived for professionalism on the job, and Nia respected that boundary. Meanwhile, Deborah continued her beverage service, greeting each passenger. She offered the older couple glasses of champagne. They accepted, though the woman kept glaring at Nia. Ray behind her tapped his seat impatiently, muttering about status upgrades gone to the wrong people. The tension felt as tangible as the pressurized air in the cabin. Once the plane taxied away from the gate, the cabin lights dimmed slightly for takeoff. Nia felt the rumbling of the engines and the pressure pushing her back into her seat as the aircraft soared into the sky. By the time they leveled off, Deborah and Amanda began preparing the breakfast service. Nia tried to refocus on her slides. She was finalizing the cost-benefit analysis for her La client, but the stares and hushed comments around her kept chipping away at her concentration. Shortly after the seatbelt sign switched off, Amanda came around to confirm breakfast choices, a cheese omelette or a fruit and yogurt plate. Nia asked for the omelette, politely thanking Amanda, who flashed her a more genuine smile than Deborah had managed. It didn't take long for the older man, Charles Whitmore, in seat 3B, to speak up. He leaned forward, addressing Nia directly. "Excuse me, I couldn't help but notice. Are you traveling alone in first class?" His tone dripped with skepticism. Nia clenched her jaw, but tried to remain diplomatic. "Yes. Is there an issue?" Charles shrugged in a patronizing way. No. Just curious how you ended up here. Sometimes people get upgraded by mistake, you know." His wife, Patricia, chimed in from seat 2B, glaring at Nia. "We've been loyal Delta customers for years, and rarely see new faces at the front of the plane. A quiet fury simmered beneath Nia's poised exterior. She forced a pleasant tone. "I assure you my seat is correct. I've flown Delta often, and I'm a Platinum Medallion member. Perhaps you've just never noticed me." She turned back to her laptop, hoping that would end the conversation. Patricia let out a soft scoff. "Strange. Well, enjoy your flight," she said, though the undertone made it sound more like a threat than a polite sentiment. Breakfast arrived, and Nia picked at the omelette, her appetite fading. Ray joined the fray from behind her, occasionally voicing discontent about the quality of service and how anyone seemed to be getting into first class these days. Though he never addressed Nia directly, his commentary was obviously aimed at her. She wondered if she should confront him, but decided it would only escalate tensions. Her father's voice echoed in her mind, telling her to channel her energy into what mattered and not let small people rob her of her peace. Yet the whispering didn't stop. Some remarks were about her clothes, which were actually designer pieces she'd purchased as an investment in her professional image. Others hinted that she might be traveling on someone else's buddy pass. She tried to ignore it, but the negativity felt as if it were sucking the oxygen out of the cabin. At one point, as Deborah came by to collect trays, Patricia flagged her down. "Ma'am, I just want you to be aware that if anyone is causing a disturbance or doesn't belong up here, we have the right to request a seat change." "Isn't that correct?" Deborah's eyes flickered to Nia, then back to Patricia. She forced a careful, measured reply. "If someone is behaving disruptively, we'll handle it accordingly. But as of now, there's no reason to move anyone." Patricia huffed. "Fine, but keep an eye on it. We paid a premium for peace." Feeling her cheeks burn, Nia tightened her grip on the arms of her seat. She had done nothing but quietly work on her laptop, yet she was painted as a potential source of disturbance. The irony almost made her laugh. Still, she remained silent. In the lulls between the flight attendants' movements, Nia's mind drifted to memories of other times she'd been questioned or disrespected for simply being in a space others thought she couldn't possibly belong. She remembered the math competition scandal, the naysayers in her early jobs, the colleagues who questioned her aptitude. Each incident was a rung on a ladder of fortitude, reminding her that excellence was her best rebuttal. But she also felt a pang of exhaustion. How many more times would she have to prove herself? When would her achievements be enough to shield her from this persistent discrimination? She sighed deeply, but the hum of the engines did little to soothe her frustration. A faint sense of comfort came from knowing Marcus was on the other side of that cockpit door. His presence acted like a talisman, even if he remained physically out of reach. She could almost hear his voice encouraging her. "We handle storms by staying steady at the controls. Don't let turbulence throw you off course." It was a motto Marcus lived by, and one that Nia deeply respected. At about the halfway point of the flight, Captain Rodriguez emerged briefly from the cockpit to confer with the flight attendants about expected turbulence ahead. Nia, seated in row 2, peeked around just in time to catch a glimpse of him. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. He offered a discreet smile, like a secret only the two of them knew. She almost laughed, picturing what Charles, Patricia, or Ray might think if they realized the pilot they so trusted was married to the very woman they were ridiculing. But Marcus didn't linger. As the pilot in command, he had responsibilities. He returned to the cockpit, presumably unaware of the microaggressions swirling through first class. Marcus's predicted turbulence arrived sooner than expected. The seatbelt sign lit up, and an announcement requested everyone remain seated. Nia braced herself, hearing the engines shift slightly as the plane adjusted to pockets of rough air. The aircraft rattled, jostling the cabin. Patricia's half-finished cup of coffee toppled, spilling onto her tray table and partially on her blouse. She gasped in shock, glaring at Nia as though it were Nia's fault. "Oh, look at this mess." Patricia exclaimed, flustered. "This is exactly what I was worried about. Where's the flight attendant?" She mashed the call button repeatedly. Deborah hurried over with napkins. Patricia pointed an accusatory finger at Nia. She was practically fumbling around, and the turbulence did the rest. "This is just unacceptable." Nia's jaw dropped. She'd hardly moved an inch when the turbulence started. Deborah, to her credit, did not appear to believe Patricia's accusations. "Ma'am, please keep your seatbelt fastened. The turbulence is not over. I'll help you clean up in a moment." No apology was forthcoming from Patricia, who simply gave Nia another one of those withering stares. Charles tried to comfort his wife, while Ray behind them let out a chuckle as if reveling in her distress. Nia wanted to defend herself, but there was no point. She told herself not to waste energy on people determined to see her as a scapegoat. Finally, the turbulence receded. Deborah collected the soiled napkins, and Patricia dabbed at the coffee stain on her blouse with a scowl. If nothing else, the incident seemed to quell their chatter for a moment. But the tension in the cabin remained palpable. As the flight neared the 3-hour mark, the cabin settled into a subdued rhythm. Some passengers dozed off or watched in flight entertainment. Nia resumed work on her laptop, triple-checking her slides. Her phone, in airplane mode, lay face down on the tray table. She contemplated whether she should text Marcus the moment they landed or let him find out. She was on board after the flight. Deborah returned for a final beverage pass, seeming more relaxed now that the turbulence had eased. She asked Nia if she needed anything. Nia requested water, then ventured a small question. "Is Captain Rodriguez a recent addition to this route?" Deborah blinked, apparently surprised. "Yes, actually. He was assigned last minute this morning. Why do you ask?" Nia smiled softly, dodging a direct answer. "Just curious. He seems highly competent from the announcements." Deborah nodded, oblivious to Nia's deeper motive. "He is. Captain Rodriguez has an excellent reputation. Passengers usually praise his smooth landings." Nia's heart glowed with quiet pride. She thanked Deborah and returned to her seat. Life has a way of interrupting even the most mundane journeys with crises that remind everyone of their shared humanity. About 30 minutes later, a man in row 4, a middle-aged individual named Kenneth, began wheezing and clutching his chest. Alarmed cries erupted from the surrounding seats. Deborah rushed over, pressing the intercom. "Is there a doctor, nurse, or medical professional on board? We have a passenger in distress." A moment of stunned silence fell over the cabin. Then a woman from economy, wearing scrubs under her jacket, rushed forward. "I'm a nurse," she announced, kneeling beside the struggling man. "He needs oxygen and possibly an aspirin, if we have any. Looks like he might be experiencing cardiac symptoms." Amanda handed over the emergency medical kit, and the nurse worked diligently to stabilize Kenneth, but his condition seemed dire. Deborah relayed crucial information to the cockpit through the in-flight phone. Within minutes, Captain Rodriguez's voice filled the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a medical situation requiring immediate attention. We will be diverting to Albuquerque International Sunport. Please remain seated with your seat belts fastened." Instantly, the earlier petty dramas in first class felt small. Patricia and Charles looked alarmed. Ray's face shifted from annoyance to genuine concern, and Nia felt her heart race. She offered a silent prayer for the man's survival. For the first time since takeoff, empathy connected passengers who had been divided by prejudice and assumptions. The plane's engines roared louder as it left its scheduled route. The seatbelt sign glowed, and the cabin crew asked everyone to remain seated. The nurse continued working on Kenneth, providing him with oxygen and monitoring his pulse. The tension was thick enough to taste, an undercurrent of shared worry overshadowing previous hostilities. Nia peered out the window as the desert terrain of New Mexico came into view. Instead of the sprawling Point La Metropolis, there were sandy landscapes and faint outlines of mountains. The pilot, her husband, was guiding the aircraft into an unscheduled landing that could save a man's life. That fact alone filled her with an odd mixture of pride and fear. She knew the stress Marcus must be under, balancing the safety of all passengers with the urgency of one passenger's critical condition. Finally, they touched down on the Albuquerque runway with a heavier thud than usual, but the plane slowed smoothly. Paramedics awaited at the gate. The door opened quickly, and medical professionals boarded with a stretcher. Passengers watched, silent, as Kenneth was carefully lifted and taken off the plane. The nurse at his side. The unscheduled landing had cost everyone time, but hopefully it had saved a life. With the stricken passenger taken away by paramedics, the cabin erupted into hushed chatter. Deborah announced the plane would remain grounded for at least an hour, allowing for refueling and the necessary paperwork that accompanied a medical diversion. Passengers were permitted to stretch their legs in the terminal if they chose, though they would have to re-board once the aircraft was cleared to continue to LAX. Patricia was among the first to stand, complaining about having to change her plans in LA. Charles followed her, while Ray also trailed behind, grumbling about missed connections and wasted time. As they stepped into the jet bridge, Nia decided to remain seated, partly to avoid losing overhead bin space, but also because she wanted a moment to breathe. The older couple and Ray left, presumably to search for a bathroom, a snack, or someone to blame for the delay. Nia relaxed into her seat. The flight attendants bustled about, finishing tasks and updating the cockpit. She felt the weight of the day pressing down on her. So much tension, yet ironically, the real emergency had overshadowed it all, revealing just how fragile and fleeting life could be. As she waited, Nia mulled over everything that had transpired in the last few hours. She thought about the open hostility, the subtle jabs, and the unspoken questions about her right to sit in first class. Here she was, a top-tier consultant, traveling on her own dime, married to the very pilot guiding the aircraft. The irony was almost poetic. She remembered something Marcus once told her about controlling what one can. In the cockpit, he'd said, "We can't change the weather or air traffic, but we can navigate through it expertly." Same in life, focus on your inputs, let go of the rest. The words offered perspective. Prejudice was like bad weather. She couldn't stop it from existing, but she could guide herself through it without letting it define her. She opened her phone, still in airplane mode, but connected to the airport's Wi-Fi, and typed a quick message to her LA client, apologizing for the likely delay. They responded with understanding. The world wasn't ending because she'd be late. A man's life had possibly been saved. In the grand scheme, that dwarfed all else. When Charles and Patricia reboarded, their earlier arrogance seemed somewhat subdued. They settled back into seats 2B and 3B, glancing at Nia with expressions that hovered between lingering prejudice and the uneasy realization that a real emergency had taken priority. Ray also returned, stepping into seat 3A behind Nia, avoiding her gaze entirely. The flight attendants took a final head count, verifying that all who disembarked were back on board. Outside, ground crews finished refueling. Eventually, the door sealed, and the plane pushed back from the gate once more, set to resume its flight to LAX. Nia's watch showed they were already 2 hours behind schedule. She'd almost certainly missed the dinner meeting, but her client had graciously offered to reschedule for the following evening. Professionally, she was in the clear. Inside, though, she felt frayed. She wanted to see Marcus, to hug him and share the day's insanity. She knew that would have to wait until they landed. For now, she swallowed her frustration and prepared for takeoff again. Once airborne, the flight smoothed out. The unscheduled landing had overshadowed earlier microaggressions. Even Ray, who had been complaining non-stop, seemed to have lost his zeal for conflict, but Nia sensed a tension that hadn't dissipated. Charles and Patricia were whispering again, occasionally glancing her way. It was only a matter of time before something else broke the calm. Sure enough, about halfway to LA, Patricia signaled Deborah with the call button. "We want to speak to a supervisor in Los Angeles," she said, loud enough for Nia to overhear. "This flight has been below the standard we're used to in first class. The turbulence, the delays, everything has been disruptive. And frankly, certain passengers made it uncomfortable for us." Deborah, looking weary, gave a polite nod. "You can certainly speak with customer service upon landing, ma'am. But I remind you, the turbulence was weather-related, and the delay was a medical emergency. Neither is in the airline's control." Patricia pursed her lips, refusing to be mollified. "I'll make sure they know exactly what happened up here." Nia closed her eyes, recentering herself. She considered turning to Patricia and calmly explaining that complaining about her was pointless. But she decided to let it go. The older woman was grasping at straws, hoping to pin her dissatisfaction on someone. Let her. Nia's truth was stronger than any petty complaint. During a brief lull, Amanda quietly approached Nia. She leaned over and whispered, "I'm sorry you've had to deal with all of this tension. I realized earlier you're Captain Rodriguez's wife, aren't you?" Startled but relieved to have an ally, Nia nodded. "Yes, I am, but it's not common knowledge." Amanda gave a subtle, supportive smile. "I won't say anything if you prefer. It's just, the way these passengers have been treating you is horrible. I know the captain would be upset if he saw it." Nia exhaled. "Thank you for understanding. It's okay. I'm used to dealing with this, just not usually so blatant." Amanda squeezed Nia's shoulder, then moved on. That small gesture of solidarity was enough to remind Nia that not everyone in first class was against her. As the plane began its initial descent into Los Angeles, the seatbelt sign flickered on one final time. Outside, the vast sprawl of the city glimmered. Even from high above, Nia could see highways weaving through the metropolis, pockets of sunlight bouncing off glass buildings. She felt a mixture of relief at finally arriving and residual tension from the hostile environment. Then it happened. The intercom crackled to life, and Captain Rodriguez spoke. "Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is Captain Rodriguez again. We're making our final approach into LAX with an updated arrival time due to our earlier diversion. We appreciate your patience and understanding. I'd also like to make a personal note, if I may. There's a special passenger in our first-class cabin today, my wife. We often cross paths in airports, but rarely have the pleasure of being on the same flight. Thank you for flying with me today, my love. And to all our passengers, welcome to Los Angeles." A hush fell over the cabin. For a few seconds, time seemed suspended. Nia felt her throat tighten with emotion. She'd known Marcus to be a consummate professional, rarely mixing personal acknowledgements with official announcements. That he broke protocol, albeit gently spoke volumes about his feelings for her, and possibly about the hints he'd gotten regarding the flight's tension. All eyes swung toward Nia. Charles and Patricia looked mortified. Ray's mouth hung open. Suddenly, the woman they had been belittling for hours, the one they suspected didn't belong in first class, was the pilot's wife. The man in charge of their safety, the figure they implicitly respected as a captain, had just shattered the prejudiced illusions they'd clung to. Nia kept her gaze forward, cheeks burning with a mix of triumph and humility. She had never asked Marcus to make that announcement, but she couldn't deny the satisfaction of seeing the mocking stares evaporate into stunned recognition. After a moment, Charles cleared his throat, mumbling something unintelligible. Patricia averted her eyes, her confidence visibly cracked. Ray muttered under his breath, That's something." Amanda passed by, offering Nia a knowing smile. It felt like a gentle victory, one that validated her as a person, but also highlighted how ridiculous the earlier treatment had been. She could almost hear her mother's voice whisper, "They can't steal your worth if you never give it away." The aircraft glided down onto the runway at LAX, the landing impeccable, another testament to Marcus's skill. A few passengers broke into applause. Nia exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. It was over. She was here. She'd survived the jabs, the snide remarks, the suspicion. And ironically, the flight would be unforgettable for reasons the bigots around her would never have guessed. Once the plane finished taxiing to the gate, the seatbelt signs switched off. People rose, gathering their belongings. Patricia and Charles seemed to debate whether to say something. Ultimately, Patricia mustered a stiff, "Have a good day," in Nia's general direction, not meeting her eyes. Charles offered a half-hearted nod. Ray said nothing at all, sliding out of his row as though hoping to vanish unnoticed into the terminal crowd. Nia watched them exit, each carrying their own silent realization that prejudice can be undercut with one simple truth: they never had the right to judge in the first place. By the time Nia made it to the jet bridge, Marcus was already there, hat in hand, greeting a few lingering passengers and the flight crew. When he saw Nia, his face lit up. "Surprise," he said, leaning in to kiss her cheek. She laughed, letting tension fall off her shoulders. "You have no idea what went on in that cabin," she murmured, though she suspected Amanda might have filled him in on some level. "Actually, I picked up bits and pieces from Amanda," he admitted, concern etching his features. "I'm sorry you had to deal with that. If I'd known earlier, I would have handled it differently." Nia pressed a hand against his chest. "You handled it perfectly. That announcement, thank you." He squeezed her fingers, the busy airport swirl around them fading for just a moment. "Let's catch dinner once we're both free, okay? We can talk it all out then." She nodded. "I look forward to it. But first, I have some business to handle." With that, they parted, each with responsibilities to fulfill in LA. Nia walked into the terminal, luggage in tow, heart brimming with both exhaustion and relief. She thought about Patricia, Charles and Ray, wondering if they'd learned anything from the day's events. Sometimes karma is subtle, other times it's a captain's voice over the intercom, revealing exactly who you've been disrespecting. Nia headed to her hotel, checked in, and took a long, hot shower. It felt cleansing, not just physically but emotionally. Her phone pinged with messages from colleagues who wondered if she was all right after the delay. She informed them she'd arrived safely, though later than expected, and arranged a new time to meet the following day. Staring at her reflection in the mirror, she couldn't help but replay the humiliating remarks and the final reveal. Part of her felt victorious, but another part felt a dull ache. Why did it take them discovering she was the captain's wife to grant her the basic respect every passenger deserved? It reaffirmed the notion that bigotry isn't rational, it feeds on assumptions and shatters under facts. She promised herself she would never tire of shattering those assumptions. Later that evening, she and Marcus managed to share a quick meal at an airport hotel restaurant. He teased her lightly about having the best seat in the house, and she teased him back about nearly giving her a heart attack with that announcement. Beneath the jokes, though, was the shared understanding that the day's events reflected a broader societal issue, one that both of them, as professionals of color in high-profile industries, confronted regularly. The next morning, Nia woke early, fine-tuned her slides, and headed downtown for her meeting with the tech startup's executives. The schedule shift ended up working in her favor, giving her extra time to sharpen her pitch. When she arrived, she commanded the boardroom like the seasoned consultant. She was articulating growth strategies, dissecting complex data, and offering solutions that addressed the startup's pain points. The CEO, impressed by her strategic acumen and confident delivery, verbally committed to a partnership on the spot. It was a 7-figure deal that could lead to even larger-scale collaborations down the line. Nia felt a surge of gratitude for every obstacle she'd overcome, every snide remark, every raised eyebrow, because they'd forged her unwavering belief in her own competence. Later, she slipped into a quiet corner of the office building and sent Marcus a text. "We got the deal. Can't wait to celebrate with you." The simple message conveyed both the synergy of their separate victories, his unwavering professional leadership, her unstoppable drive, and the love that bound them through every flight plan and financial forecast. In the days following the flight, Nia learned that Deborah and Amanda had filed an incident report about certain passengers' harassment toward another first-class passenger. While the airline's customer service approach was discreet, it wasn't unheard of for repeat offenders to face consequences ranging from warnings to, in extreme cases, denied upgrades. Amanda later confided in Nia during a separate flight weeks later that Charles, Patricia, and Ray had indeed attempted to file complaints about the uncomfortable flight, but the airline, backed by statements from Deborah and Amanda, recognized the real cause of the discomfort. They didn't publicly penalize the trio, but they did note the incident on their passenger profiles. Should they exhibit similar behavior in the future, stricter measures might be taken. Nia took no delight in potential penalties, but she did feel validated. Her father had once said, "The truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how much someone tries to bury it." In that instance, the truth was that these passengers' attitudes had been as much a disturbance as any turbulence. Back in Atlanta, a few days later, Nia found time to visit her parents, Henry and Teresa. She recounted the entire saga, the disapproving stares, the tense exchanges, the emergency diversion, and ultimately, Marcus's announcement. Her parents listened intently, their faces shifting between concern and pride. "Well," her father said at last, leaning against the doorframe of his auto shop, "you can't fix people's hearts the way you fix cars. But you did fix the narrative they tried to push on you." Her mother, tears shining in her eyes, added, "They'll never forget how they learned who you really are." Sometimes that's how change starts, when prejudice is confronted head-on. Nia nodded, embracing them both. She promised to return soon, though her schedule remained hectic. Despite the exhaustion that accompanied her travels, she felt a renewed commitment to be a role model for younger professionals who faced similar barriers. Months passed. Marcus moved on to pilot larger aircraft, including international routes on Boeing 767s and occasionally the Airbus A350. His reputation among the airline's leadership soared, as did his log of flight hours. Nia's client roster expanded rapidly, her success story amplifying across the corporate finance sphere. Invitations poured in for her to speak at conferences, sharing her insights on venture capital, growth strategies, and personal perseverance. Yet, no matter how busy their schedules, Marcus and Nia found ways to connect. Sometimes it was a quick weekend in a city halfway between their respective obligations. Other times it was a simple phone call at odd hours, one in Tokyo and the other in New York. They'd share stories of daily triumphs and remind each other that they were more than their titles, they were each other's support system. Inevitably, conversation often drifted back to that Flight 1123, where ignorance tried to demean. Nia, only to be upended by a single powerful statement, "I'd like to thank my wife for being on board today." It wasn't about nepotism or using her marriage as a shield. It was about revealing the absurdity of prejudice that hinged on flawed assumptions. Through that moment, Nia's presence in first class was validated in the eyes of those who doubted her. But in truth, she needed no such validation. She had earned it on her own merit long before stepping onto that plane. In the end, the greatest triumph wasn't that a black woman in first class was proven to be the captain's wife. It was the reminder that she and every other person of color who has fought to belong had always belonged by virtue of their own efforts and worth. When Nia once asked Marcus if he regretted making that announcement, he smiled softly. Not for a second. If it made them think twice about their assumptions, it was worth it. And so, they continued their journey across busy skies and boardrooms, buoyed by each other's love and by the undeniable fact that no seat, be it in first class, a conference room, or anywhere else, was off-limits to those who dared to claim it. The planes kept flying, and so did they, two souls refusing to let turbulence define their flight path. What started as just another business trip became a lesson in how ignorance can crumble when confronted by truth. The black woman those passengers tried to belittle in first class was, in fact, right where she belonged on her own merits. And yes, as the captain's wife. Yet the real victory went beyond that single revelation. It lies in the reminder that dignity, resilience, and self-worth should never hinge on someone else's acceptance. If this story touched you, if you felt the sting of prejudice or cheered for an underdog's quiet triumph, then please show your support. Give this video a like, share it with friends who need a reminder that bigotry never wins in the end, and remember to subscribe for more dramatic, uplifting stories. Your engagement helps us continue shining light on the power of integrity, courage, and a little bit of well-deserved karma. Let's keep standing up for what's right, one story at a time.